As we get started in this course, it's important to understand a few things about how economists think and how they work. So this is a little bit about those methods of economics. First of all, a couple of basic assumptions that mostly all economists agree on. One is that people behave rationally, and by that we mean people make choices that are good for themselves. They choose things that will bring them more happiness or more money, etc. Second, which follows closely behind that first assumption, is that incentives matter. Since people behave in ways that are good for themselves, we often will use incentives or look at incentives that already exist to understand why people are behaving the way they're behaving. Economics, in fact, could be described as the study of how people respond to certain incentives. It's important, if we want to understand human behavior, to look at the incentives or the why behind what people are doing. Second, in studying particular economic questions, economists often use something very similar to what people in the hard sciences like chemistry and physics use to study their questions. So it's sort of like the scientific method we use in economics. So it's similar to the hard sciences in that we will construct a theory or hypothesis, design an experiment to test it, collect data, and then decide whether the theory has a basis or not based on our evidence. But it's a little different from the hard sciences in that for economists, the lab that we work in is the world around us. We study firms and consumers that exist around us. We don't sort of create scenarios in a lab like you might in chemistry with test tubes. So it's not always easy to design experiments. So sometimes we'll have to use historical data to look for answers to our questions. Those questions will take the form of usually one of two forms: a positive statement or a normative statement. A positive statement is a claim that we can, in fact, test to see if it's true or if it's false. A normative statement is a statement that's more opinionated. Can't really be tested true or false. It's about what ought to be or should be. And these are sort of the questions that we get into when we get sort of more on the policy side of things. And we want to know, should we enact such and such policy or not? Generally, in order to be able to test claims, we prefer that they're positive so that we can, in fact, design some experiment to test what's going on. So just to practice a little bit, here are some examples of positive or normative statements. The moon is made of green cheese. This is a positive statement. It's false, we know, but it's positive because we can, in fact, test it and see if it's true or false. Rich people should be taxed more. This is a normative statement. We can't really test whether or not they should be taxed more. We could test maybe some of the effects of taxing them more, but the statement they should be taxed more is an opinionated statement. It's a normative statement. More taxes on the rich will increase tax revenues. This is a positive statement. We can test that. Everyone should donate to charity. Again, should. That's a normative statement. I think everyone needs to work at a bank to see the true value of money. Again, normative. Government intervention in markets is bad. Again, an opinionated sort of question. Normative. Economics majors earn more on average than sociology majors. We can test this. It's a positive statement. And lastly, everyone should take Economics 2106. It may be true, but it's still sort of an opinionated statement. It's a normative statement. Lastly, when we devise an experiment or a model to try to look at why people or things interact in the way that they do in the real world, we'll often make this assumption, the assumption of ceteris paribus. This is a Latin phrase that means other things being equal. It's an assumption where we examine the change in just one variable and hold all other variables constant, and it allows us to isolate the effect of a single variable. So if we wanted to know whether raising taxes on the rich will increase government revenues, we know that a lot of other things may be happening at the same time in society. There may be a huge housing boom, or there may be high interest rates, or all sorts of other things could be going on rather than just a change in tax rates. But we'll assume in our model all those other things stay constant and don't change, and we'll look at only the effect of the change in that tax increase on the rich, and we'll see how that affects the government revenues. So that's an example of this assumption of ceteris paribus that often just makes our lives easier when we're examining models. We don't have to worry about every possible thing in the world that could be changing. We'll just we'll zero in on the one thing we are concerned about at the moment, and we'll be able to see how it affects the outcomes that we're interested in. So again, just fancy Latin phrase, but really has this sort of simple meaning of just holding everything else constant or other things being equal.